We're here. It's a new day back in the office. Woo-hoo. What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Today, we're going to tackle passive income. Here's the thing. Passive income. It's one of those trendy, cool to talk about topics. But then when you get into the nitty-gritty of it, it's just a lot more nuanced and complicated than meets the eye initially, even though it's a really sexy topic to talk about. When I'm using that phrase passive income, what I'm really referring to for today's purposes is leveraged income. But that phrase is not as sexy and not as search friendly as passive income, because no income is truly passive. Like, you just show up and money comes in. There's some things that approach that, but generally that only exists if you are already sitting on top of a very large pile of cash and then you are investing that money wisely. But we're not talking about that today, because most of us, I don't know, if you're already sitting on a giant pile of cash, then good job, I guess. You probably don't need to watch this then. When we talk about leveraged income, we're talking about income generated after the moment when you put in work. When we see therapy clients, that is very active income. I see you for 50 minutes and I get paid for those 50 minutes. So today we're talking about leveraged income. Whether it's big money or little money, we're talking about money that you're able to generate after you already put in the work before. There are a lot of different ways to generate leveraged income, but for most of us who are looking to generate money after we put in some work, usually we're looking at starting a business to do that. Recently, I was watching an episode about passive income by Ali Abdaal. I think he's great. I will link to that episode below, where he shares a lot of helpful information about how to come up with a business idea that generates passive income. And let me make clear, I thought that this episode that I watched was very useful and the advice that he shared. But also, as I watched the episode and I was agreeing with everything that he said, I was thinking, there's some pieces that are coming to mind to me as I hear him talk about, how to have success with passive income that I think are worth spending some time with. We want to look a little bit more at the hurdles, at maybe some of the deeper psychological hurdles that can come up that keep us from having any kind of traction with generating passive income in some sort of business model. So if you have wanted to generate passive income, tried generating passive income, maybe failed at generating passive income, this episode is for you. And for today's purposes, I'm going to just use the phrase passive income. Just know whenever I say that, I'm really referring to leveraged income, okay? I personally have 2 businesses. I have a part-time therapy practice where I see therapy clients, and then I spend the other half of my time running private practice skills, which is where you are experiencing either this video or podcast. And I generate mostly passive income from this business. Okay, so I have 2 main points that I would like to convey in this episode. The first point that I'd like to emphasize, hot take, I know, is if your primary motivator is to make money, you're setting yourself up for failure. How does that even make sense? We're talking about generating passive income, so obviously you're looking for ways to make money. But here's the thing. Most of the time with passive income, you have to work for a very long time before you generate even a little bit of money. If your primary motivator is to generate income, it's really going to be difficult to have success because you are not going to make money for a very long time. I have so much empathy for being in the position of saying I need to make money yesterday. So if there's a way to generate passive income, sign me up. If the goal is to make money, it's going to be much more difficult to get to that payout if there isn't something much more substantial and intrinsically motivating behind whatever business idea you're generating. Because in reality, if we're thinking about something that you would need to dedicate, I would say a minimum of let's say 5 hours a week, and you had to do that week in and week out for at least a year potentially before generating any income from that effort, it's going to be really easy to burn out, to lose momentum, to lose sight of why am I doing this 5 hours this week if I'm still not going to see a payout potentially for 10 months. It's easy to just let it slide off the to-do list because no one's paying you for those 5 hours. So I think the motivator that's far more important than earning income is, what's something that I can intrinsically stay motivated to do consistently for a very long time without getting paid? And if someday I might get paid for it, that would be awesome. That's the mindset that I think is much more sustainable when it comes to building a business that could someday generate passive income. In other words, this first point that I wanted to make in this episode is that passive income is not, I want to make money, what do I do to make that money? Instead, passive income is saying, this is important to me, it's worth diving in. And yeah, hopefully someday it also can generate some income. But it's important enough to me that it's worth doing even before I make any money from it. So I think instead of asking, for the tips and tricks to keep your hustle culture, to keep you going and white knuckling it while you maybe hate whatever things you're doing day in and day out without getting paid, instead, I encourage you to think of it this way. Ask yourself, what things do you enjoy doing the most, even if you're not paid for them? What activities do you feel drawn to? I think some people are going to ask this question and everything that comes to mind is going to look like resting, because I think societally, on average, people are way too overworked. So if you're fantasizing about vacations, sleeping, R&R type things, to me, that's just your body's way of signaling wow, we could really use a whole lot of rest. We should definitely rest. If you have the privilege and option of regrouping, taking some rest, and entering into more of a wise mind state, to make a DBT reference, where you feel grounded in the things that really matter to you, then you can ask yourself this question again. Okay, if money were no factor and I could just spend my time doing whatever I wanted, what am I most drawn to? And see what comes up. Everything I just said so far was the point number 1 that I wanted to make in this episode. But point number 2, I think, is the bigger one. I have walked through this line of thinking with a number of folks, a number of friends, and we get to this juncture where I say, okay, but if you could just spend your time doing whatever you wanted, what are you drawn to? And we hit this point where either they'll answer, well, I just need to make money, or they'll say, I don't know. For so many of us, we have been raised in a society, right? You didn't create this scenario, you just went with the currents that pushed you in this direction. But for so many of us, we're raised in this society where so much of our sense of worth and meaning comes from our ability to generate money, that then if we take that option off the table for just a thought exercise and we say, okay, if you don't need to make any money and you could just do whatever you wanted in a way that aligns with who you are and your values, what matters to you. So many of us don't know how to answer that question. It just comes back to the money. I just need to make money. That's what I need. That's the thing that I need. Or it's this kind of vast, dark room that hasn't had the lights turned on in a really long time, if ever. And because society is built this way, a lot of us can kind of go through all of life practically, where we can just sort of clock in and clock out, get our paycheck, and not really have to ask this question of well, what really matters to me? What really makes me me? What gives me a sense of worth aside from my ability to be productive? So if you get to this point where you're saying, hey, I'd really like to generate some passive income, tell me what to do, and I am throwing it back at you and I'm saying, what's really important to you? What are the things that make life worthwhile to you if money is off the table? And you're saying, I don't know, then I think the invitation and the opportunity is to focus on developing a sense of knowing who you are, developing a relationship with yourself, really. I entered therapist woo-woo land. I mean, hey, I'm a therapist. I've got to do it sometimes. If you really don't know yourself, then it's going to be really difficult to then invite yourself to do something very challenging for a very long time without extrinsic rewards of money in this case. You know, I might think of it like somebody who trains to do marathons. Most people aren't born with just like a built-in natural ability to just run an entire marathon. Usually you have to work at it for a long time. And also for a lot of us, running feels like work. Most people don't pay us money to run also. So there has to be some other motivator that keeps you running. If, let's say, your whole goal was to run a whole marathon, but everything else about running the marathon you hated, it's going to be real hard to get to that marathon. Like if your only goal was crossing the finish line and you had no other motivator related to all the work that goes into training and preparing and running so that you can run that marathon, then it's going to be so difficult to ever get across that finish line. It's also going to set you up for a crash. If you do, let's say, get across that finish line when that was your whole goal, then once you cross that finish line, what's left? You accomplished the thing. Is there anything else that's important to you? But if there's aspects about the training and the work that's involved, challenging yourself to push yourself a little bit further next time or running that mile a little bit faster, there's going to have to be other variables that you find motivating that you are getting to actively achieve and receive throughout your training process, even though all of those intrinsic motivators don't minimize how absolutely rigorous it's going to be to train for that marathon. It has to have rewards within the entire journey, not just waiting for the quote unquote payout at the end. Now, clearly in this episode, I didn't give the step-by-step guide for like, here's the steps to, effectively train for that marathon. But a lot of people do have those steps and they are effective if you have that intrinsic motivation. So I'll link to some of my other episodes about passive income. I'll link to that Ali Abdaal episode that I've referenced a few times. And if I have any other links, I'll throw them in there too. Who knows? But I think the things that I shared here are relevant to anybody who's looking to start a business that generates passive income, aka leveraged income. Okay. And before we close, I'd like to thank TherapyNotes.com for sponsoring this video. TherapyNotes helps with all of your practice management needs, whether it's scheduling, notes, billing, a HIPAA-secure telehealth platform, and now a suite of AI features to streamline your documentation process. If you'd like to check out TherapyNotes, you can get 2 months to try it for free with no commitment just by clicking the link in the description of this video. Well, I hope you found this episode helpful wherever you are, whether you were thinking maybe someday you might start a passive income business, or if maybe you've been giving it a go for a while and it's been tough. If you have any tips as far as overcoming the passive income hurdles that can pop up, feel free to leave them in the comments below so others can glean from your experience as well. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.